So my name is Candy Tanaka. I'm the Programming and Learning Event Coordinator for the Vancouver Public Library. And my colleague Jorge Amigo, the Head of Cultural Programming, is also here with us today, and he'll be helping out in the chat. So please feel free to say hi to Jorge in the chat. So again, just want to mention a few housekeeping things. Make sure to change your little blue button at the bottom of the chat screen to everyone. And if you have any Q&A or questions for our panelists today, you can just enter it at the bottom of the Zoom screen there. And I'm going to turn it over to Mack right now. He's going to do the Indigenous welcome for us. Thanks, Mack.
Na siam na sia I na tswamoch Kwasoktin Quanasquich I Tenitzen Musqueam I Tana Squawin Quens Equitsnawa Siatawatson Quath Cliclech Yatham Amit Sep Quet Huivam I Tana Schwathquiamach Tamoch Tash Amits Tas Hank Minam Khan I Tlu Tash Alquat Ta Squamich I Ta Sawilwatach Misteoch Nitzen Giltam Nasya Ya Quants Hank Minam Khan Sasutu I Quath Quawin Hi everyone, my name is Kwasoktin. My English name is Mack Paul, and I'm from Musqueam. I'm super honored to be with you all tonight. And I just wanted to start the evening off in a good way by speaking my traditional language, Hunkaminam, which is the language of the land here in Vancouver. Tonight's event is hosted by the Vancouver Public Library, and the Vancouver Public Library is on traditional, ancestral, and unceded Musqueam territory that we share with our relatives from Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mack. And I want to take a few minutes out, or not a few minutes, a few seconds out to say thank you to all of our panelists here today. They have a very busy schedule this week, so we really appreciate your time. And I'm going to introduce our moderator tonight. Our moderator is Courtenay. Courtenay Gibson is a proud Musqueam member who has lived in the community since the age of 9. Courtenay has a passion for giving back to the community and has done so in various roles throughout her career. She has worked as a recreation manager for Musqueam for 15 years and held a dual role of senior manager of 7 departments focused on community service for 4 years before returning to school part-time. And Courtenay has been very kind and said, just a short intro is fine. So I'm going to turn it over to Courtenay, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I was thinking much shorter than that, though. Diamna Siya, Antha Courtenay Gibson, Tulitsanat Chomathquiam, Haisapka Quath Ami. Respected friends, my name is Courtenay Gibson, and I come from the Sparrow and Charles families in Musqueam, in what is now Vancouver. And I just want to say thank you all for joining us today. I'm very passionate about community, and as someone who has connected to language learning through my roles in community, I'm really, really excited to be here and to help moderate this panel with these 3 exemplary language advocates who are all going to be sharing a little bit about, I think, their journey with language learning, language advocacy, some of the really cool things that they're doing in terms of language revitalization. And I think that will, speak to the importance of language revitalization in BC. They're all going to take about 8 to 10 minutes each, do a little bit of sharing, and then we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. And feel free to put some questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll keep track of those. But first up, we're going to have Dallas Hunt. Dallas is Cree and is a member of the Wapa'asu Sipi, or Swan River First Nation in Northern Alberta. Dallas is an assistant professor at UBC in the Department of English Language and Literatures, where he teaches in the areas of Indigenous literature, or anti-colonial theory and critical theory. Dallas is also a published author whose works can be found in the Malahat Review, the Canadian Literature, and the American Indian Culture and Research Journal. Dallas's first children's book, Oasis and the World Famous Bannock, was published in 2018 and nominated for the Elizabeth Mrazek Cleaver Canadian Picture Book Award. So if everyone can welcome Dallas, we'll turn it over to him.
Tatsuni Temdek, Dallas Hunt Nitagasan, Nia Omanehio, Egwa, Wakasusipio Tania. So hi everyone. My name is Dallas Hunt. Yeah, I am Cree and I'm from Swan River First Nation, as was just said. And yeah, I'm a professor at UBC. So should you be there, please take a class with me if you would like. And yeah, I just want to talk a bit about language revitalization, just generally in terms of how I approach it as a scholar and also as a lifelong learning or a lifelong language learning person. So I wrote this book. It's called Oasis and the World Famous Bannock. I'm going to really reflect on that a lot today, mostly because part of the reason I wrote that book was because of notions of language revitalization, especially Cree language revitalization. And yeah, I think the concepts embedded in the text are worth sort of like reflecting upon, but not that my work is, you can read it and discard it, it doesn't matter to me. But the concepts in here, I feel like are sort of universal or well, they're specific to Cree communities, but they also have a function outside of those kind of very particular communities. So what I wanted to do today was just to talk generally about myself, and then I have a slide that I can upload very in like, yeah, I will just upload it. So I am not a fluent language speaker. I work probably almost every day on Cree revitalization of the language. And I mean, this is critical in the context that we're in right now. So given the Orange Shirt Day on Friday, you know, one of the things that were kind of stolen from us, I guess we could say, is our languages, right? And so there's lots of work to be done. And it's really a sort of iterative process in the sense that you constantly need to work on language and things like that. So part of the labor that comes out of something like the Indian residential school system is that Indigenous peoples are then tasked with the task, I guess you could say, to relearn the languages that were stolen from them. So I'm scared like a mummy's gonna pop out of that closet or something, but yeah, so I think that it's a task that Indigenous peoples have to do, and I don't want to project and say every Indigenous person has to do these things. It's rather, I just want to know a language. Normally at this point, I would say to speak to my Cookum with, but my Cookum passed about 2 months ago. So I think I can talk to my aunties about it. So I'm just looking for a way to communicate because of the sort of colonial imposed strictures that sort of stopped us from learning our languages. So that's really what I'm interested in. And my mom's this tiny Cree lady. My dad is this like, you know, Brit Scots, like Scandinavian person, and so that's why I look the way that I do. But I also I'm very invested in how my community does and is doing. I'm very invested in Indigenous politics generally, and yeah, that's sort of why I'm here today. So this will be a bit more fun, hopefully. I'm not sure, but we'll see. I just want to show you all how to write a children's book while using Indigenous languages. So, well, I do want to raise my hand. Sorry. Yeah, there we go. So, Oasis and the World Famous Bannock is the text that I was talking about. Can y'all see that, or are you still looking at me?
We can see.
Absolutely, great. So, I wrote a book called Oasis and the World Famous Bannock, and I won't go so much into the story because I'll go over my 8 minutes, but it's written by me and illustrated by my friend, Amanda Strong, and they are a filmmaker, and they do a lot of stop clay and emotion stuff, and it's just, it's really remarkable, the kind of work that they do. And they are Métis, maybe slash Anishinaabe, but mostly they identify as Métis. And so, yeah, I just wanted to give you a brief sort of, yeah, just to let you know how something like this comes into being, how it manifests. So what I want to say about that is that it's really hard to write a children's book, and I did not think that. I wrote it, but the wonderful editors at Highwater Press gave me so many sort of tactics and ways to intervene that would make the notion of language revitalization or retention, any of these things, sort of more, not only stay more, but the sort of retention of them would be actually much more generative. So I'll get to that. So coloring, I was going to get you all a sheet of coloring so you could color this, but my apologies, could not. If you want one, I do this every time I visit a class, and I give them a coloring page. But so the evolution of Oasis. So what happened was I had an idea, and the primary driver of it was the revitalization of the Cree language. And so I thought, you know, how can I get this across in a story? And I'm writing a follow-up to this, and I'm still thinking about it. It's not just the Cree language, but sort of Indigenous cultural and political processes, right? So I thought, well, I could just have a story that is about relationality and kinship and sharing and all of these things, wherein you not only learn parts of the language, but you at least, or hopefully, you learn sort of some of the sort of driving dynamics that sort of animate a text like Oasis. So, and by that I mean a sort of relational ethic that sort of orients the way that we want to be in the world today. So something to look forward to in the future, but it's prefigurative in the sense that it sort of orients our events or how we engage with people now. Basically sharing and helping and all these things, sort of relational ways in which we engage with one another. So originally the book was called A Boy and His Bannock, just because I like the alliteration. And so that was one of the mock-ups. And yeah, I like Oasis and the World Famous Bannock instead, because it actually gets at, or it bypasses the way in which we might think about notions of gender and things like that, right? Like there are a boy and his bannock is just, you know, it's sort of like it's like a club. Yeah. I wanted to sort of expand upon notions of different genders within the text, but also like just generally. And so, but this was a conversation I had to have with the editors. So when you're talking about how Cree people understand gender, or how some Cree people might understand gender, it's sort of an ongoing conversation, and you need to, if you're in conversation with other peoples about this, and the editors of my book were great. It's just you need to sort of be strategic in how you sort of engage these issues, especially as it comes to Indigenous language and notions of, you know, gender and all of the, and like colonial violence writ large. Obviously, we're going to talk about that on Friday. I'm sure all of us, like, just individually, or at least I hope so. And so, yeah, I kind of wrote the book in order to kind of, anyway, it was great to engage in a discourse with one of the editors about, well, why are we gendering this character? Awasis as a term is not gendered, it just means child, right? And so, how are we engaging with, you know, all these other complex issues, as well as issues of language revitalization and things like this. So I just wanted to show y'all the sort of sort of transformation, or the how Awasis comes to be. So again, this is a book you can buy in stores. The royalties go to my cookum, or at least will go to my cookum in some way. And it has my cookum in there. Cookum means grandmother. So it has her bannock recipe, all of these things. We had extensive visits to talk about this book. And I think that's a worthwhile praxis or methodology in terms of how we approach things, that visiting and talking to our grandmothers. And it really shapes how we come to be as just as humans, essentially. And so we talked about her bannock recipe, we made the bannock, and then I put it in the book. And this is one of the original sort of mock-ups of how the book could potentially look in terms of its cover. I thought the person at the front was too bro-y, like, so I was like, I don't know. And so we had a different manifestation of Awasis, which is right here. So this is Awasis pre the Awasis that we have in the text. And I just like the way in which language and notions of sexuality and like gender and things like that sort of move us along to sort of recapitulate how we formulate a character such as this. And so I was like, well, I don't know. I think Awasis should be, because again, Awasis just means child. So I just wanted a figure that could encapsulate all that enables, and the sort of horizons of that, and things like that. And so we got here. So Awasis looks a little different. And then eventually, let's see, we arrive here. So we have this cute little figure, and it was as close to Awasis as we can get. Awasis in the story has overalls, but in here does not. And so what I liked about the text, or when we were working on it together, is I wanted to really get at the notion of Cree language revitalization, or how we talk in Cree. And some people might say that things are particularly gendered in Cree, and I don't disagree with them. I'm a Cree language learner and speaker and things like that. But I also think that I'm one of those people who actually says that our language actually doesn't as much sort of incorporate the notion of gender and then deploy it through a sort of gender binary that like frames all and structures all ways of engaging. In fact, I think an uncle can look like anything, and I think an aunt can look like anything. It's really how we engage with the language and how we use it that is sort of the most important part. So for this language revitalization sort of panel that I'm on, I just wanted to give a sort of insight into how when you're writing a book, especially a children's book on my part, and I hope I'm not over time here, that we can actually sort of think through these notions in a generative way that some people say, well, this means uncle and this means aunt and etc. And I'm like, if we can parse the English language, we can parse Cree as well. It's not it's not free of critique. It's not any of these things. You're able to actually engage with the language and live in it and sort of expand upon what that might mean. So if I wrote another version of this book, aunt or uncle might be in here, but an aunt or uncle doesn't have to conform to particular binaries that are already instantiated, especially in a sort of Western colonial sort of mindset. So I might have an uncle who might not be legible to other people's, but I like to work through the language, and the language helps me, and I just take it on. And so when we're talking about language revitalization, I think we can work with our languages, and they will work with us in turn, because it's all kinship. So, but okay, I think that's enough for me. I talked very long. So that's a book. It works on language revitalization, and Kenneth Compton for having me. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Dallas. I think it's easy to talk and go over time and just keep going when we're so passionate about what we're speaking about. And I just wanted to say thank you for sharing about Oasis and the world famous Bannock, which I want to go get a copy just so I can get that recipe.
Did I go over time though?
Oh, just no, I think right on time.
Oh, okay, perfect, thanks.
Yeah. And it's just really, really beautiful. I think, I know you talked about the labor of relearning language, and I think this book is a really great example of some beauty that can come out of that labor, and how being relational is highlighted through your connection to your cookum and the book. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's really, really good to learn more about the book, and I'm gonna go try and get that recipe. Next, we're gonna have Aiyana Twig, who on her mother's side is Tunaha, and Blackfoot on her father's side, and is a registered member of the Blood Tribe. Aiyana grew up on the traditional and ancestral and unceded territory of the Tunaha, the Tobacco Plains area. Aiyana is grounded in teachings and cultural practices that were passed down to her by her grandmother and the elders in her community. She recently graduated from UBC with a double major in anthropology and First Nations and endangered languages, and has also won a Lieutenant Governor's Medal for her work as an Indigenous language in Indigenous language revitalization. She's a proud Tunaha member and a youth leader who supports language revitalization and learning in innovative ways. Over to you.
Giso gwashgwaik pineskil, who sugil Courtenay Gibson soccer na sanidki, who got click Ayanna Twig, who ini tunachat, one mugantic, who gaki agingum class no clear. Good evening, everybody. I'm so happy to be here today with you all. My name is Ayanna Twig. I am Tunaha on my mother's side and Blackfoot on my father's side. And I grew up on the traditional ancestral unceded territories of the Tunaha in Tobacco Plains. So since I grew up in the Tunaha territory, I never really had the opportunity to learn about the Blackfoot language or culture, which I do still want to try to do one day. But most of my research and documentation is within the Tunaha language. I also like to think of myself as an Indigenous youth activist in language vitalization and Indigenous rights. As Courtney mentioned, I just graduated from UBC in May. And so I kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about my kind of journey with language and then kind of just the projects I'm working on. So I first kind of started back with the language, or I started relearning Tunaha in 2018. And so before this time, I did grow up around elders and community members who taught me the language and our cultural practices. But around 5th grade, I kind of decided that I didn't really want to learn our language or our culture just due to a lot of racism and discrimination I was facing in school. So I kind of had like this shame, I guess, for being Indigenous. It was a very difficult time for me. And to the point where, I had a lot of identity crisis, and I just, I wasn't happy with who I was. But it wasn't until 2017 that I kind of started to reconnect with the language again and our culture. And through this reconnection, I felt this sense of clarity of who I was. I was able to accept who I was. And yeah, I just felt like through the language and through the culture is what really kind of healed me. And I just felt really happy. So I actually decided then that I wanted to also help other community members who may have been facing the same things I was through language. So I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in linguistics at UBC. So I started my undergrad in 2018, and I was 18 at the time. And then over time, it kind of, as I started learning more about language and language vitalization, I decided that I actually wanted to focus on language vitalization. And that's how I started in the First Nations and Endangered Languages program and linguistic anthropology, just because I felt like it fit my values a lot more. And so throughout my undergrad, I definitely started becoming a lot more involved through language vitalization, through a lot of different projects within my community, but also through a lot of projects for my undergrad, like through assignments and just like other research opportunities. So I will be talking a little bit about some of that, but first I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about kind of like my philosophy around language vitalization, just so that maybe you can get a better idea of kind of how I approach language vitalization. So I do have slides, so if Jorge, can you please pull them up? I don't know if you're able to. Okay. Oh, I don't see them. Okay, sorry, I'm coming to you from my iPad, so I can't share them myself. So yeah, so my philosophy with language vitalization, I kind of wanted to just talk about really quickly, because I feel like when a lot of people talk about language vitalization, there's so many different things you can talk about when it comes to language vitalization. Like you could talk about it for days and days and days. I mean, I did an entire 4-year program just about language vitalization. So just in this very short 10-minute presentation, like I'm not going to be able to really talk about kind of like, my approach to language vitalization. But whenever I do talk about it, I always kind of share this. So language vitalization, the surface definition or the surface idea of it is that you're trying to increase speakers of a language. So you're basically trying to make an endangered language not endangered. And while that is a very important goal of language vitalization in a lot of Indigenous communities, I think that that's not the only goal that we're trying to achieve. And so when we're talking about language vitalization, I think it's really important to understand kind of like the entire goal of what it means. So to me, I strongly believe that language is intrinsically connected to everything. And what I mean by this is that I don't think language should just be looked at on its own. It shouldn't be looked at just for its sounds or for its communication or for the amount of speakers. but it should actually be looked at being connected to who we are as people. So it's connected to culture, it's connected to your identity, it's connected to your history, your society, all of those different things. And the same thing is true when you're looking at culture or when you're looking at identity. So basically, they each have an influence on one another, and you can't have one without the other. So for example, like I identify as being Tunaja, but that also means my language. So if my language was, if it was sleeping, for example, I couldn't confidently say that I'm Tunaja because I don't have my language. My language is a huge part of my identity. It's who I am. It's how I understand the world, understand my culture. So I just think that's a really important part when we're thinking about language vitalization. And this is kind of how I understand language vitalization. And I think it's a really important thing to understand. So I hope that was helpful to you guys. Can you click to the next slide? Jorge? Okay. Yeah, so now that you kind of get a better understanding of kind of my perspective on language vitalization, my philosophy, I just wanted to talk about kind of the things that I've been doing with language vitalization. So the first thing I want to talk about is social media. And the reason I want to talk about social media is because I think it's become one of the biggest tools for language vitalization, and it's also been very successful. I mean, if you think about today's society, everybody has social media, everybody has a phone. So it's really no surprise that social media is a very successful way in trying to revitalize languages. So I actually created an Instagram page in 2020 called Tunaja Pride. And I originally created this page to try to share my knowledge about the Tunaja language, history, and culture to other members, because I learned that a lot of community members didn't actually know this knowledge. And I was very fortunate to grow up in community and learning these things despite not really wanting to. I still did. And so I wanted to be able to share this knowledge with everybody. And a lot of people were telling me that they wanted to learn, but they just didn't maybe have access to this information. They didn't know where to start. So I thought maybe creating an Instagram page would be a very simple and accessible way of doing that. And that's kind of how my page first started. And yeah, I think it definitely helps with language vitalization. It's definitely inspired youth in my community to start learning, even youth from other communities to start learning. So that was something I didn't really expect, but I think it just shows the really amazing and positive effects social media can do. It can reach to different people, different areas. So yeah, so on this page, I just share a lot of videos about our language, our history, our culture. I also post other things just in general about Indigenous rights. So yeah, next slide. I not only use social media, but I try to also use as many technology tools as I can. So during my undergrad, for one of my classes called FNL 380, I actually created a animated Tunaja oral story. And I think this was one of the funnest projects I've ever been a part of in terms of language revitalization, mainly because I feel like we were able to really show the Tunaja language in a different way than you usually would see it. I think it just shows the different capacities language can be in, especially Indigenous languages. I feel like there's this kind of stigma that Indigenous languages should only be spoken like traditionally, or like they should only be spoken in certain settings, but it can be anywhere and it can be everywhere. So I thought this just really kind of showed how that can be done. And it was also really fun to kind of translate this old oral story and also record the audio with an elder. So I voiced it and also another elder voiced the characters. And I think that also just kind of hopefully inspired other Indigenous youth in my community to start speaking, because a lot of times growing up, I would always just hear audio recordings of elders speaking, and it would always feel very intimidating. So I was hoping that by myself voicing a character, it might encourage people to start learning. And it also just kind of shows how language can portray our culture and also how our culture can portray our language, because this oral story does have cultural teachings. So it kind of like was shown through that. Next slide. I've also done my own research. So this, as part of my undergraduate degree, I started doing this research on the Tunica writing system. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't have a lot of time. This is also ongoing research, but basically the goal of my research was that I wanted to document the history of the Tunica writing system, because this has never been done before. And while doing so, I also was assessing the writing system for any potential gaps. And the reason that I started kind of doing this research was because myself, a language learner, I started realizing that there was a lot of gaps within the language, and I just kind of wanted to understand like how other people saw it. And I also kind of wanted to represent that we have these colonial writing systems that were created for our languages, but that doesn't mean that we can't actually take back those writing systems and, change them in ways that align with our own views. I've also done research at UBC. I was an undergraduate research assistant on the RELEX project, the Relational Lexicography project, and I helped create online resources for under-resourced communities to create their own dictionaries, and that was a really fun project I was a part of. And next slide. Okay, and this is the last thing I'll talk about. So currently I am involved in the Mentor Apprentice program. So if you're not aware with what the Mentor Apprentice program is, it's offered through First Peoples Cultural Council, and they offer support to Indigenous individuals learning their Indigenous language. And the goal is to do 300 hours of language learning from June to March. And so you kind of go through these sessions with your mentor. So it's kind of like a one-to-one relationship, like you are only with one mentor and you're supposed to be in person with them. And during your sessions with them, it's only immersion. So you're only supposed to be speaking your language. And so I meet with my mentor, Mary Nasila, and we basically just kind of sit and just speak the language to each other. I mean, I'm not a fluent speaker. I don't know too much, but she still speaks it to me. And even though I don't understand, I'm still listening and kind of trying to understand as much as I can. So this is what I've been involved in. And I also tend to record our sessions, and I'll post them on my Instagram page just to show people like what we're working on. And the ultimate goal of this program is that I want to become a fluent speaker, but this will obviously take more than 1 year, but that's kind of like my goal, is just to learn as much as the language as I can and also share it with as many people as I can. So that's everything from me. Thank you so much, everybody who's here, and I hope some of the information I shared was helpful. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Aiyana. There's some really powerful messages in your story. And I think to me, what stood out was that, you've used language learning and revitalization as a tool for healing and reconnecting, and that powerful message of language is how you understand the world, and how you've been able to translate that into different mediums that allow you to share that with others is really powerful. It's great to see. So thank you for your sharing. So up next, we have Colossalton, or Mack Paul is their English name. Mack is from Musqueam and works as the nation's protocol officer, helping to share Musqueam culture and values throughout the traditional territory. Mack is also a Two-Spirit Pride activist, and they grew up with a family who ensured they were enriched with culture and tradition. This cultural grounding led Mack to become a learner of the Hunkaminam language and an advocate for the language. And so I'll turn it over to you.
Kwasselton Konisqui, e Tenitsin Musqueam. Hello again, everybody. My ancestor name is Kwasselton, and I'm from Musqueam. I don't have slides for you. It's just gonna be me talking to you. you all about kind of my journey with my language, Huntkaminam. Just for context, there are no fluent speakers of Huntkaminam presently. I would say that there is one semi-fluent speaker left in our community. So revitalization is a very prominent and very near and dear to my heart. I don't think I started learning my language until maybe 2016. My best friend, Vanessa, works for our language and culture department. And at the time, she was also the TA for the UBC First Nations and Endangered Languages program, which she introduced me to. She really encouraged me to join the class, but I was really skeptical just because, you know, a lot of Indigenous folks go through classroom trauma. So I was really scared to get back into the classroom because it was a university level course, and it was my language, and I'm a very shy person. I don't often speak very often. So just kind of the whole concept of it was very, very scary to me. But I just, you know, just jumped right in, and I knew that there was quite a handful of Musqueam people that were in the class, and I knew Vanessa would be there, and so I felt very comfortable joining. And with that, there was a lot of support, and I'm so glad that I did, because that was a really big turning point in my life. Like Courtenay had mentioned, I'm a very cultural person, very spiritual person. But language was never really a part of that until I started the class. Like, because there are no fluent speakers prior to 2016, prior to when I started doing the class, I just knew, you know, just small phrases like, you know, like asking how somebody is, random body parts that you kind of like learn when you're growing up. How to say no. But that was kind of the extent of it. So it was a, like I said, it was a really big shift to kind of expand my language knowledge, and I'm so glad that I did, because now that's kind of at the forefront of you know, what I'm doing in my life, and what I'm doing with my work. I'm the protocol coordinator for Musqueam, and that is entrenched with, you know, how we're represented on our territory. And there's this, you know, I don't want to say misconception, but there's this like old idea that, you know, Indigenous identity is, you know, regalia and songs and dances. It's very visual. But presently, I think what's most important is our language. Our language is tied to the land. It gives you a sense of place. And, you know, up until about 25 years ago, like, I mean, well, actually prior to that, but our language has always been oral. We didn't have a writing system, but with the inception of the FNEL program at UBC, they, you know, we now have an orthography that we type in. We use NAPA, and that is very integral to our language, because, you know, the English alphabet can't accommodate all the sounds that Huntkaminam has. There's sounds that can't be represented by the alphabet, English alphabet. And so using NAPA, which provides a single one symbol to one sound, you know, after going through the FNEL, which really introduced me to being able to read Hunkaminam, but also because there are no semi-fluent speakers, now that I'm able to read it, I'm able to speak my language. You know, there can be any given sentence put in front of me, and you know, through practice, I'll be able to read it, and so that way, the language will never die. You know, it might be hibernating right now, but yeah. So that was kind of my educational journey. And then I did 3 years with the FNEO program, and then I started shortly after I started my position with protocol. And quite quickly, anytime anybody wants to kind of build a relationship, and like how they can, properly represent Musqueam, I start with the language. It's really important to see the language throughout our territory, to provide that sense of place for people. So some of the things that I've been doing in collaboration with the Language and Culture Department are, naming places in the city. We've named, I believe, 2 plazas and in downtown Vancouver, Shanak and Aiyana. One's at Queen Elizabeth Theatre, the one's at the Vancouver Art Gallery. Yeah, and one of our biggest partners is UBC, which is on solely traditional, ancestral and unceded Musqueam territory, and they're very, they're great at incorporating Hunkaminam. We recently named 5 new residences in UBC. They're called Tlalomitsin, which is orca, Kutaythin, which is sturgeon, Shawit, which is herring, Tumis, which is otter, sea otter, and Ima, which is octopus. So they're all saltwater animals, and again, tying with language, when you receive a name traditionally, it's a really big responsibility, and so every time we name something, our partners have to go through a traditional Musqueam naming ceremony. And the importance of that is that you have a responsibility to carry these Hunkaminam names, because in our culture, if you are disrespectful, that name can be taken away. So these names were gifted, and yeah. And also another collaboration with UBC. They have we've done street banners that are probably up right now, that are the translation for the Hunkaminam translation for Every Tribe Matters, and that phrase is Waketa Stechwas Tamakwet. And our English and Hunkaminam can't ever directly be translated, and so the phrase actually means all children are important. That's just another thing that kind of comes with Indigenous languages, is that there aren't always English words for words in our language. Another project is in community, all of our streets have been translated into Hunkaminam, and a recent project that we've done is replace all the stop signs community with the Hunkamina word for stop. Yeah, I'm thinking my time is up, but I could ramble on forever and talk to anybody forever about Hunkamina, but I'm happy to be here, and thank you.
Thank you, Mac. You took me back to my nervousness about language learning, being in some of the classrooms with you, and I was like, oh man, I remember that feeling. It was so strange to feel that all over again. But thank you for sharing. I think some things that really struck me was when you mentioned the language will never die because of this work, and it might be a little different, but it won't ever die. That's really powerful. And it's really great to see how you've taken your learning journey and changed and translated it into a career, and a career that is making an impact around the city of Vancouver. If I could maybe just ask Aiyana if you're able to come online, and we have gotten the go-ahead to go a little bit over time to take a few questions, which is great. Like some of the panelists were saying, it's something we could probably talk about for hours or 4 years. And I just want to acknowledge Dallas, who had to step off for a bit of an emergency, but to thank him for his time. And so one of the questions that I see in the chat, and feel free to jump in, is how is revitalizing a language different from reclaiming it?
I guess I can go. So at least how I see it, the difference between language revitalization and reclamation is language revitalization is often just looked at as kind of trying to increase the number of speakers in a community. So you're kind of trying to get more and more speakers, the language is trying to become more prevalent. Whereas language reclamation goes beyond language revitalization in that people are actually trying to like gain rights to their language. They're trying to also, as I kind of was explaining, like in my philosophy, like you're trying to understand the language like culturally. So the difference is that like revitalization, you're just talking about speakers, whereas like reclaiming is talking about everything, like the rights, the culture, everything. That's at least what I see it as.
Yeah, I think kind of building on top of that, in terms of reclamation, a big topic that's was kind of reemerged this year was having our Indigenous names on our ID, and how that, because the governments can't accommodate characters in our orthographies, we can't identify as legally as our Indigenous names, and that's that's kind of backwards, and hopefully that will be acknowledged, and then in that essence, that would be us reclaiming our language. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. There's one more in the chat from Cecilia, who asks, do any of your languages have several versions of the we pronoun, given that your cultures are not individualistic? So I'm thinking this might be a big question, but something we can touch on, because I know that it's a lot of how the languages are formed is quite complicated, but I'm sure we can share a little bit about that. And then if there's any more questions after that, I think we have time for one more. So if anybody wants to jump in, feel free.
So I'm just thinking,
It's a big question in terms of
Yeah, I don't really know how to answer that. At least to my knowledge, I don't think that we have, like, I don't know, it's really hard to like answer that. But based on my knowledge with my language, I don't think we have different ways of saying we, like, it's pretty like general, like in the context of what you're saying, if that makes any sense. Like it's hard to explain, but yeah, it just depends on like the context of what you're saying and like who you're speaking to, basically, is the simplest way that I can say it.
Yeah. Like the general word for we, like when is like, which is visualized with the letter C and T. But there are phrases that that have suffixes that acknowledge we or us. I'm not sure if that's kind of like what you're alluding to, but it can be like built into a phrase. It's part of a word. Yeah.
No, it's definitely a good question. Probably one that would take a few hours of working through.
I gotta pull up my school books again and flip through them.
Yeah, I have some charts in the background.
Yeah, the chart. That's what I'm thinking of too.
Yeah. So I think we have one last question, which is a really, really good question from Alec, is how can your audience tonight, particularly those without an Indigenous background, contribute to language revitalization?
There are plenty of resources online, especially like when we name things in Vancouver. We typically, I'm sure, have sound files on our partners' websites that teach you how to pronounce the names that were given to that space. Like, for example, we just named a park downtown with the Vancouver Parks Board. It is Stakochienam, which translates to rainbow. And to, actively participate in revitalization would to be to not use the English translation. Call, when you're acknowledging that park, say Stakochienam, and use the online resources that are available to learn how to say it, and say it to your friends, your family. And that kind of goes across the board with anything. Yeah, like there's plenty of resources for Hunt Community anyway. There's a lot through UBC. There's a teaching kit that goes through the alphabet, that goes through all of the sounds that are in a language. Yeah, I think, and then other than that, if you want to partner, again, like what's important to me is having it visualized throughout the city, having it used throughout our territory. So yeah, if if you're willing, I'd love to put Hunt Community all over our territory.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, I think just understanding that like there are so many different Indigenous languages in Canada, and just trying to, I mean, like obviously you don't have to like try to learn all of them or just even know all of them, but just whatever territory you're coming from, maybe just trying to learn about that community and even like their language, even just learning how to say like hello, or even trying to learn the place names of that community, kind of what Mac was talking about, like learning how to properly say those things is supporting us in language vitalization. Just because the biggest thing that a lot of Indigenous communities and their languages face is, I would say, awareness and just kind of knowing that they're there. But also, I also wanted to add that I think one of the biggest issues in terms of language revitalization for our communities is access to resources, including funding. So I think one way that you could actually be supportive is becoming an ally and advocating for our languages. Advocating for support, for funding, support to resources, all those types of things, because that's the number one thing that at least I see in our community that we struggle with. We don't have equal access as like provincially they do to English. Like we don't have enough teachers, we don't have enough resources to teach our languages, which all comes down to funding. So I think like if you can help advocate for funding for us, that would be really helpful. At least that's what I think would be helpful.
Thank you for taking those questions and for sharing your perspectives. I think we will start to wrap up now. And thank you both for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. I just wanted to remind everybody that Candy put in the chat a survey to respond to how you like this webinar. So go and try and fill that out. It would be helpful. And I will now turn it over to Candy, who will close us out for the night.
Yeah, thank you. That was very great. I mean, it was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us and your time as well. We know it's a very busy time for Indigenous peoples right now, so we really appreciate you, taking the time out to basically prepare and also to be with us here tonight. And I also want to thank our online guests or our online people as well for watching. Thank you to Courtenay for your excellent moderation. It was great. You were very smooth and did everything perfectly. And I want to thank Mack, Aiyana, and Dallas for sharing your personal stories with us. It was really heartfelt, and it was really nice to learn more about what you're doing to help out with Indigenous language revitalization. Thank you all again for joining us tonight, and thanks to my colleague Jorge for helping out in the background to keep the event running smoothly. As mentioned by Courtenay, we'd love to receive feedback about this event, so we're going to share the link again to the quick survey. If you'd like to see more programs like this, please let us know. One event that we have coming up soon that I'm going to mention is happening at the Grand Staircase on level 8 at the Central Branch on Wednesday, October 5th at 6:30 p.m. And it's called Opera Adventures, Discovering Bizet and the Pearl Fishers. And it's a teaser performance for Vancouver Opera's upcoming production of the Pearl Fishers. It's going to be a tantalizing event with performances and presentations by the artists and experts who make up the local opera scene. So we'll share a link to that in the chat. And if you want to, eventually this program in the next day or so will be online. You can share it with your friends and rewatch it if you'd like to. So thanks again for everyone for your support tonight. We're going to leave the chat window open for a few minutes in case you want to open up or copy any of the links that we shared, but we really appreciate everything. And again, thank you so much to our panelists tonight. Have a great night, everyone.